What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Geek Pantheon. I am Eric, and we are back at desk because the past couple videos you all have in the comments been extremely not decisive. Some of you really like the other format, some of you like the desk. So I'm just gonna, if the video makes more sense for me to be standing up in front of a green screen and have lots of visuals, I'll do that. If it calls for a much more kind of chill, let's just have a chat vibe, we'll do desk. And today we do desk. What is up? I today want to talk to you all about my home game and specifically initiative and how I run combat for 8 players. Because yeah, that's a lot of players. That is on the bigger side of recommended D&D groups. Some people would even say not recommended D&D groups. And I'll be perfectly honest, when we were sitting down for our first actual session and I knew there was going to be combat, I was nervous. I was really worried, A, because a lot of players, B, because there were a lot of new players. About half the table had never played before, and another half of the other half of the table had only played once or twice. So if you keep it up with the math, I had 2 players that I would call experienced, 2 that have played a couple times, and then 4 brand new, never rolled dice before players at the table. And so I felt a lot of pressure because I wanted this to be a fun and engaging experience for them. I wanted them to come back for session 2, and I knew that the combat of the session was going to be the centerpiece of it. I knew that's what was going to make or break a lot of people's enjoyment of this game. And so I did homework's the wrong, I prepared. I thought through what are some things I can do to try and make combat run as smoothly as possible, because the last thing I want is for one combat encounter to last 2.5 hours when we only have 3.5 hours scheduled for playtime. And guess what? It was like an hour of the total session time. It was wild of time at the table, which is an important distinction I'll get into in a second. So yeah, I was shocked. Maybe it was like an hour and a little bit of change. The total combat ran 3 hours and 2 turns. Like basically 2 players got to go into the 3rd round and then combat was done. So do the math for whatever fraction that would be. So a decent combat. It wasn't a really short combat. It wasn't 1 or 2 rounds. It was, kind of that sweet spot of 3 to 5 rounds. And yeah, it went really well. It went really smooth. Everybody had a great time. And I want to share with you the 5 tips that I have for running your combat smoother and making combat flow easily. Because if 8 players can do an entire combat in under 2 hours, then by golly, they did something right. And I'm going to share it with you. Number 1, batting order is what I'm going to title this section. So every time somebody's turn came up, and this is something you see a lot of experienced DMs do. I think Matt Mercer does it on Critical Role. But I would say, this player, you're up. I'd look at the next person in the initiative order, you're on deck. And then I look at the person after that and say, you're waiting. And they understood the nomenclature that waiting, there are 2 people in front of you. On deck, you are the next person. You're up. It's your turn. And an important thing is I would skip enemies. I would acknowledge them when I was calling it out. So if I had player, 2 enemy slots, and then player, I would say player A, you're up. Player B, you're on deck after the 2 enemy slots. Player C, you're waiting. So that they knew, okay, I am the next player that is going, so that they're not caught off guard. And what this did is it helped reinforce the turn order in everybody's head. And it got to the point where at the end of the combat, the person that was about to be on deck would call it out before I even had a chance to. I would tell somebody that they were up and be like, okay, I'm on deck. And the next person would call out that they were waiting. Like they learned the turn order based on who came before them and who came 2 people before them, so that they mentally could start thinking about their turn, start getting everything together. And very rarely did I have anybody completely halt the flow of combat. And the only times that happened were rule clarifications, because remember, half my table is brand new. So there were some stopping points, but it was, okay, how does this thing work on my character sheet? Okay, I want to cast a spell. How does that work? Because I also took the attitude as a new DM that I could sit there for the first 45 minutes of session 0 or session 1 and try to explain the rules of D&D. It's much better to throw them into a low stakes combat encounter and let them learn by doing, in my opinion and in my experience, because everybody loved it. Number 2, Visual aids. So I have this thing. It's a big old whiteboard. It was my wife's in her office, and then she didn't want it anymore. And I said, I'll take it. So, and I've literally had it in my closet doing nothing until now. I finally found a use for it. So I have that. And then additionally, I have this. This is a kickstand for that. I got it on Amazon for like $10. And it's just a tripod with some like hook things to where I can put that on the whiteboard on it and have that behind me. And what I did is, as we were writing down initiative, I wrote it on the whiteboard really big where everybody could see it so that they saw the turn order, and I wrote the enemy slots there. At this particular time, because they knew what they were fighting, I just wrote like goblin snipers, goblin boss, etc., because they visually could see. And once again, it was a low stakes combat. I might just write enemy slot 1, enemy slot 2, if I want to maintain some level of mystery, but still have the initiative order be visible to all of them. Because, yeah, it's kind of meta for them to know when the enemy is going to go in the turn order, but I know when they're going to go in the turn order, and I'm controlling the enemies, so technically the enemies know when they're going to act. I am not at all concerned about the fact that they know when the bad guys are going to go. But once again, I wrote all that down. They could see it. It was easily visible behind me. And at the top, I had a round tracker where I just wrote round, and then I did tally marks. Because part of the combat encounter was they were fighting for speed. They basically were trying to set a record in the fighting pit. And I told them every tally mark is 6 seconds. The record is 42 seconds, 7 rounds. Thank God it didn't take 7 rounds. And so that also kept them engaged of like, okay, it's 2 rounds. That's 12 seconds. Let's keep going. And so, yeah, that made it a really fun, engaging element. So having visual aids behind you or in front of your DM screen, just anything to where the players can look and see when is their turn. Because if they are 4th or 5th out, you know, it might not be a bad idea for them to start thinking about their turn, but you haven't called it out for them yet because you're calling out the next 3 people at any given moment. So having that visual aid also helped a lot, and it helps with synergy. If somebody wants to see, okay, who's going right before me, who's going right after me, and they have a plan for what they're going to do in combat, and they see, okay, this person is going right before me, well before they're waiting or on deck, they can turn to that player and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking on my turn. So if I do this, so if I'm going to go after this person, so don't take them out because then that'll mess me up. So once again, it eliminates a lot of that paralysis of the person who went right before you just screwed up every plan you had since the previous round. You can communicate. You can talk about it. Once again, from like a realism standpoint, not realistic because you can't tactically plan in the middle of combat. Everybody had a good time. So the visual aid thing, absolutely do it. And before we get on to the next point, I just want to once again call out, we are on the road to 10,000 subscribers, and it's really exciting. We're gaining more every day, and I just wanted to remind you all, if you haven't heard yet, that when we hit 10K subscribers, I'm going to buy one of you something nice off the DMs Guild or D&D Beyond, your choice. It's just a single book though, no bundles. And yeah, but if there's some book that you've really been craving that you want to get, then subscribe to the channel, tell your friends to subscribe to the channel. Let's get to 10K and I will buy it for you. Number 3, use minions. Yep, we're going for it. It has become a thing to where it can't be a Geek Pantheon video without me hyping up 4th edition. But this time it's actually MCDM Productions and their love of 4th edition and the work that they're doing. Flea Mortals is their big monster splat book that they're working on. They had a big Kickstarter. You can still pre-order it and get all of the preview material. But I will say, even if you don't want to spend any money right now, or you want to get a sense of what it's like, they have an accessibility preview on their webpage, on their store, that you can go download for free, and it has the rules for minions in it. Minions aren't behind a paywall for them. They have a video on their YouTube channel on how to create minions, and it is like evergreen rules, can be applied to any monster. It's not here are our specific minions. It's just here how minions work. Here's how you can build them from any monster in the monster manual or all the other monster material. And the reason I say minions are vital for combats running as smoothly as I ran them is I was able to throw a ton of monsters at my party. I think there were like 23 total goblins that they had to fight, because I'm running for 8 players. That's a lot of players. And if I'm going to make something that's threatening to them, I have to match or beat them in the action economy. And if I'm running fully fleshed out monsters, if I'm having to run 8, 9, 10 of those things, that's going to be a slog for me and for the players, because I'm tracking so much. Whereas minions, I was able to throw out 20 goblin minions, which equate from a difficulty standpoint to 4 goblins. It's a 5-to-1 ratio. So in an actual difficulty standpoint, from a CR standpoint, it wasn't that hard. It wasn't that difficult for them. But it seemed that way, and it was in the first round because the action economy was so far stacked against them. But there are plenty of spellcasters, and there's some really cool rules for how to deal with multiple minions as a martial character that are really fun. And we had, based on the rules, our barbarian throw a javelin that went through one goblin and into another one, and it was super cool, and that player loved it. And it creates a very engaging combat because you're dropping goblins left, right, and center, which keeps you engaged, which keeps you excited. It does not feel like a slog. And it made it to where the one goblin, the goblin boss, that did have a fair amount of hit points, I think it was like 32 hit points, but they're all level 1, so that's not nothing. But it was a fun challenge, and they were like exasperated, saying, how tough is this guy? Because they had like decimated all of his allies, and it was a fun thing that this last goblin wouldn't go down. It wasn't a slog like, oh my god, can we take this guy out yet? So that, I will say, was a huge boon to this whole combat encounter, and that's why I think minions are an outstanding tool to use. Please go check out the rules, even if you don't like the concept of minions, because things only having, well, they don't have 1 hit point actually. It's, go read the rules, because they're great. They're so fun. My players loved them. I loved running them because I didn't have to manage hit points. I didn't have to roll damage for them. They do a fixed amount of damage. They're great. Go check them out. Number 4, set expectations at session 0 and then reiterated at session 1. I told all the players, a lot of them are new. A lot of them are still really green when it comes to D&D. So I'm going to be infinitely patient with them. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to explain things. And at no point should they ever feel guilty for having a question about how the game is played, as long as my patience is not abused. And I told them there's a difference between you frantically looking at your character sheet when your turn comes up because you're lost in the rules, you don't quite understand what your abilities do, you thought you had a spell prepared but you don't, etc. There's a difference between that and having been on your phone for the whole round and, oh crap, I didn't hear you say that I was waiting, I was on deck, and now it's my turn. That's different. And I specifically called out that example because that's the most common thing that will occur. And everyone took it seriously. At no point was somebody looking at their phone, unless they were looking at D&D Beyond on their phone for a spell or something. But nobody was just messing around, waiting for their turn to come around. And then when their turn came around, oh crap, I haven't looked at what I'm planning on doing. Everybody was there. Everybody was engaged. Everybody took it seriously. And there was lots of table talk. There was people chatting and like socializing even. Like they weren't always talking about the game, but they were engaged in the experience at the table, which meant they were paying attention, which meant combat flowed quickly. And I 100% believe it's because I set those clear expectations for when they're playing at the table. As long as they don't abuse my patience will flow infinitely. Number 5, take a break. That's why I said time at the table was just over an hour. About halfway through the combat, I called a bio break. I said, all right, people need to go to the bathroom, go refill your drinks, go grab some food, whatever. Yeah, let's take 10 minutes. That 10 minutes did more towards the whole combat not feeling like a slog than the other 4 things combined. I'm convinced, because it's a break. It's a moment to recharge, go to the bathroom, get a drink. We chatted for like 5, because it doesn't take 10 minutes to go to the bathroom. So we stood around and just socialized for like 5 minutes. And then I called, okay, everyone, let's get back to it. And everybody was ready to come back. Everybody was engaged. Their batteries were recharged. They had fresh drinks. They had fresh food. They had gone to the bathroom, and they were ready to go again. And Some of you might think, well, that will break the tension, that will break the immersion. I dispute that wholeheartedly, because you know, as the dungeon master, where you're at in the combat. You know how much more combat is left because you can see the metrics by which the combat length is measured. You can see the hit points of all the monsters. You can see how many monsters are left. You can see what other elements of the encounter are going to activate and not activate. And so you can find a dramatic moment to call for the break. And you can have the players go, no, wait, what? No, let's keep going. It's like, no, let's take 10 minutes. Like, okay. And you'll have people dying to get back to the table, ready to play, so engaged, ready to go. But even outside of that, just taking 10 minutes out of your multi-hour session in the middle of a combat encounter can allow people to, some players were talking about the combat. They were strategizing, thinking, okay, so if we do this and this and this. Other people went and grabbed a beer and just talked about their weekend and what they were up to and what they were looking forward to the coming week, etc. And all of that is great. All of that is fine because it's about having fun. And the important thing that happened during that break is one of the players, my wife actually, pulled me aside and said, okay, there's a disconnect and I'm not quite understanding this aspect of the rules. And talking to the two people sitting on either side of her who are also brand new players, I think you need to take a moment when we come back to kind of level set the rules and like kind of explain this element of it. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I can do that. And being able to get that feedback in the moment of like, here's something that is going on in this combat that I think would be served with some kind of fix. And getting to get that feedback halfway through the combat as opposed to the end of the combat or the end of the session is great, because I was able to come back, take her advice, engage with everyone, clarify those things. I saw light bulbs going on and we went on with the combat and everyone was super happy and engaged, and the elements that they weren't sure about, they were now sure about and ready to go. And that is it. 5 tips for making your combat run smoother, have your players be more engaged. Even if you have a huge 8+ people table, these tips, if you utilize them, if you engage with your players in this way, you will have combats that run smoother. Your players will be more engaged. And even if the combats run a little bit on the longer side because you have a lot of players, they won't feel as drained because you're doing things to keep them engaged and let them recharge their batteries while they're in combat. Thank you all so much for watching. I've been Eric, and I will see you next time.